Thank you for being here today. It's a joy to have this time together with you. We are in the series of lessons called All In, and I'm glad you're here as a part of that. I hope that you got your poker chip on the way in. If you didn't, you could pick one up on the way out. These are to serve as a reminder to all of us to every day we have to make that choice to put our chips on the table to go all in for Jesus. So I hope that you will use that as a reminder for your life. I've really been enjoying teaching this series All In. It's a passion of mine as a pastor that we not allow any of us to go through life just going through the motions as a Christian and not really going all in for God. We miss so much when we hold out, when we hold back instead of going all in. Some people think, well, the Christian life is so boring and it's not really exciting and it's not that much fun. And I'm convinced it's because you haven't gone all in. When you go all in, the excitement level goes way up off the charts, right? I mean, it causes you to stretch. It causes you to go beyond the ordinary. That's where the excitement really is. That's where the fulfillment is found. That's why I want to challenge all of us to make that choice every day to go all in. As I was preparing this series, I was looking at different examples of all-in choices that were made in Scripture, and today we're going to look at another one of those examples. If you've got your Bibles, you can be looking at 1 Kings. Go ahead and turn there, 1 Kings chapter 19. We're going to look at an encounter there and talk about the surrounding elements to go along with it. But as I was preparing, I was thinking of this idea of going all in and examples of that in history, and I came across the phrase, burn the boats. Have any of you heard that phrase before? Burn the boats. I thought, well, now, what exactly does it mean to burn the boats? And I was reading a historical account that most historians say it goes back to the Spanish conquistador named Cortez. And when Cortez came to the peninsula of Mexico to conquer and take the treasures that would be found there, he brought 11 ships with him, and he brought 500-600 people with him, but he's coming to a peninsula with hundreds of thousands of people already there, and he's coming to conquer. And other explorers had come before him and tried, and none of them has succeeded. Now, I'm not saying European conquest was a good thing. That's not what we're saying. I want you to know the mindset that he came with, because he was successful when he came. What made the difference? Well, historians tell us that when he landed there, they docked the ships out just a little off the coast there, and then they came in small boats and everything, and they got to the beach, and he had them bring all the supplies off the boats, all of them, not leave anything on the boats at all. And then traditionally they say that he got them on the beach, and he told them, I need you to be totally committed to this. Others have failed to do what we're about to try to do. Others who brought more people and more ammunition and more supplies have failed at what we're about to try to do. And I don't want us to fail. I want to know that you're with me, that you're going to give your all for this. And then he gave the order, burn the boats. Now, historians have now researched this a little more, and they don't believe he actually burned the boats. They believe the order he gave had gotten mistranslated over time, and he said, scully the boats, which means sink them right there in the harbor. It has the same effect. You know what he was saying? There's no turning back here. We're all in on this mission. There is no option here except to go and try your best to achieve what we've come here to do. Now, historians also tell us that this wasn't the first time something like that was done. And I don't know if Cortez knew about the history, but Alexander the Great had done the same thing when he went to conquer Persia. He had taken ships there, and when he got his troops up on the beach, he actually literally did, as far as we could tell from historical records, he actually burned his ships in the harbor to signify we're all in here. We're not turning back. In fact, turning back is not even an option because the boats aren't there anymore. There is no way to turn back. I think as followers of Christ, what the Scripture indicates that it means to be a disciple, a disciplined follower of Christ, is that when we come to Him and we make that commitment, we burn the boats. We don't leave it as an option to turn away, to turn back, to not continue in following Jesus. When I talk to people that are getting married, I always ask them, what's your view of divorce? How do you feel about divorce? And if they tell me right up front, well, if things don't go well, I think, you have to look at divorce. And I always tell them, if they give me that answer, you're not ready for marriage. If you're holding out already up front, holding that out as an option, as an out, then you're not ready for marriage. Because you're supposed to go all in when you say, I commit to you for life. That's an all-in commitment. Now, I'm not saying God doesn't allow for divorce in some situations. He does. Scripture allow for it, but that's never what He wants. And if you go into it with the attitude that I've always got that option, it's always on the table, then you're not really all in that commitment. So today I want us to look at an example of what it means to go all in. Before I get to the example in 1 Kings, though, I also remembered an account in Acts chapter 19. I just wanted to refer to it a minute because it uses the idea of burning the boats. Only was it boats in this case. In Acts 19 and verse 19, some events have occurred that have caused great fear in the area where the disciples were taking the gospel. Some others had been not really followers of Christ, but trying to use the name of Jesus and the name of Paul to cast out demons, and it had gone bad for them, and it struck fear into the hearts of the people. But I want you to notice the response of one group of people in Acts 19 and verse 19. It says, a number who had practiced sorcery brought their scrolls together and burned them publicly. When they calculated the value of the scrolls, the total came to 50,000 drachmas. Now, 50,000 drachmas sounds like a big number, and it is, but it's bigger than we think sometimes. A drachma was one coin that was worth an entire day's wage, okay? Wages for a whole day. This is 50,000 days' wages worth of scrolls, sorcery books that they had burned up that day. That's huge. You know what that's saying? They weren't going back to sorcery. They weren't even leaving that on the table as an option to go back into sorcery again. They destroyed that option so they would never be tempted, because they couldn't replace that. That value of what they burned, they could not go replace that. So they're saying, we are not leaving that as an option for us. In light of God's power and God's work, we never want to go back to sorcery again. So here's the question for us. Have we burned our boats? Have we burned our scrolls? Have we taken all the options off the table except to follow Jesus? No matter what, no matter how hard, no matter what the challenge is, does He have us fully committed to Him? Are we really all in for Jesus? Well, back in the Old Testament, God often spoke to the people through prophets. And He would choose individuals that He wanted to represent Him to His people. And He would inspire them and lead them. And the Spirit would give them the words to say and the message to bring to the people. And oftentimes the role of a prophet wasn't glamorous. It wasn't where you had a lot of prestige and honor with that role sometimes. In fact, many times the prophets were not treated well at all. And we forget that. We think about the prophets of the Old Testament, and they were giants of the faith for sure, but they weren't always treated that way by their own people. Just like preachers aren't always treated that way today, right? They don't always have respect. They don't always have honor, sometimes because of some things they've done, but sometimes it's just that people don't show honor and respect to that position anymore. And the prophets didn't always have that respect either. And so to be a prophet was an honor as far as your relationship with God was concerned, but it was never an easy job. And God called only the certain people that He thought could handle that role, could do a good, faithful job in representing Him. And today we're going to be looking at two of those prophets who have similar names, and it's easy to get them confused, okay? They're talked about here in the same verses we're going to look at. There's Elijah with a J, and there's Elisha with an SH, okay? Elijah and Elisha. Elijah came first. God had called Elijah. He had been speaking on God's behalf to the people for a long time now. And he knows that he's nearing the end of his time to serve as a prophet. He's getting older. He knows his life is probably nearing the time it's going to end. And there's going to be this passing of the mantle, so to speak, from Elijah to the next person God was choosing to come take the role of that main prophet for that time. And God needed someone who, like Elijah, would be all in on this, that would be fully committed to this, because it was not an easy job. It required him to say things to the people sometimes that they did not want to hear. I don't know what that's like, but sometimes that has to happen, right? Can you imagine what that would be like, to have to tell people stuff they don't want to hear? Stuff that says, you know, what you're doing is not okay, you need to make some changes here, and judgment's going to come if you don't make the changes. That's not fun for people to hear. It doesn't always attract big crowds. And if it does, they don't always leave happy, right? Now, that doesn't happen at Lakeshore. I know you all leave happy every week. But at some places, that could happen. And Elijah's done a good job with it. He hasn't been perfect. You can read about Elijah. He had some down times too. He had some times when he really struggled and wasn't always handling things the way he needed to. But overall, he stayed committed to it. He didn't turn away. He followed through to the very end and being that spokesperson for God that God had called him to be. And now God is revealing to Elijah that there's someone else that needs to come on board. And I like the way God led Elijah to do this transition. He wasn't just going to have Elijah die and then somebody have to start from scratch. He's going to have Elijah bring someone alongside him for a little while, okay, to learn and to experience and to shadow Elijah for a little while, so that it's not all on him right away. It's kind of like if you had a mentoring program in your company or something like that, it's like a mentoring program that's going to happen here. But the person that's going to be chosen to be mentored by Elijah needs to be someone who's willing to go all in. Because if you invest all this time and this effort and you take him before the people and say, this is God's man for you, and then he doesn't follow through with it, you've done a lot of damage. You've done a lot of damage, like a lot of us who say, I'm all in for Jesus, and then we don't follow through on it. It can cause a lot of damage, okay? It can cause a lot of people to turn away instead of be drawn to God. So Elijah, with God's leading, wants to pick the person that is going to go all in and not turn back and be faithful through the whole deal, so that that message, that witness will be there consistently the way God wants it to be. He wanted someone who would speak well to the people. So in chapter 19 of 1 Kings, we're going to pick up in verse 19, where Elijah goes to make the official selection, okay? And they had a way of doing this that I think is really, really cool. I want you to hear and see in your mind what's going on here. It says, Elijah went from there and found Elisha, all right, two different people, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Now, he doesn't mean he had all 12 yoke oxen hooked up to his, all these oxen are under his immediate control. It means he's got one of the units hooked up that he's leading, but the others are all out there too. So, but he's the one in charge of all of this. So what occupation did Elisha have? He was a farmer. He's farming the land out there, okay? You know, God picks people that a lot of other people wouldn't pick sometimes to go do what he wants them to do. Sometimes you think, well, I don't have the background or the experience or whatever, and you kind of excuse yourself from being used by God in some really powerful ways because you think you don't have the right background for it. Well, this guy's just a farmer at this point, okay? All right, look at what happens here. Elijah went up to Elisha, to him, and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. So think about this. He's out there plowing. Elijah walks up to Elisha. He has to stop his oxen. He has to stop his plowing because Elijah comes up to him while he's still hooked up to the plow and and takes his cloak off and puts it on Elisha. And that's the symbolism they used. I'm indicating that you're the chosen one now, who's going to come and take my place. It's being turned over to you. This is the way God was saying symbolically, Elisha, you're the one that's going to come into the role that Elijah has had all of this time. You're going to now step into that role. So the cloak was the symbol of stepping into that role of the prophet that was coming next for the people, so that God could speak through him. So Elisha has to make a choice of how he's going to respond to that. And that's the whole reason for doing the symbolism here, is to see how he's going to respond. I mean, he could take the cloak and lay it down and say, I want no part of that. Or he can hold on to it and claim it as something he accepts. He's got a choice to make. Because God doesn't force anyone to follow him, to represent him, to speak for him. God doesn't force anyone to do that. Right? He gives us that free will to choose. Now, he will call, and sometimes he will pursue, but he will not force. Now, God pursued me because I wasn't really all in tune with God when God was working on me, bringing me to be a preacher for him, a teacher for him. I wasn't really at a point where I was even thinking about that, but God was already pursuing me, and I love that God will do that, but I still had the choice. I could still turn my back on that or be obedient to that. And Elisha still got a choice here when the cloak is put around him. But Elisha gives this response, okay? Elisha left his oxen and ran after Elijah. And he says this to him. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? Now, sometimes we can read it the way it's worded there, and it sounds like he's saying, oh, no, what have I done to you? I'm sorry. No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is I'm not doing anything to prevent you from doing that, okay? You could go back and tell your parents goodbye. That's okay. He's not saying you can't do that. But I want you to see the next steps that Elisha takes. He says he wants to go back and tell his parents goodbye. Verse 21. So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and become his servant. Think of the symbolism of that. His whole life had been given to the family farm. He grew, no doubt, he grew up there. He had worked the farm his whole life. That had been who he was. His parents were still there. We know that because he's saying he wants to go back and kiss his parents goodbye before he leaves. So we know his parents are still there. He's got family there. He's got his life connections are all right there on that farm. But what does he do? He takes the very oxen he was plowing with, butchers them. He takes the plow, all right, the wood, the plows would have been made out of wood and metal, and he takes the wood from the plows and he makes a fire with that to cook the meat from the oxen that he was just plowing with. In other words, he had him a big old barbecue with the family, right? He threw steaks on the fire and cooked them up, and they had a big celebration there, okay? Some of you might grill this afternoon, right? Have a big time with the family, you know? Crank up the grill. And that's what he did. But what he's saying in that is the big deal. He's saying, I'm not going to leave an option here to go back. If I decide to give my life to God in service, I'm not going to leave anything on the table to go back to. I'm going to go all in. And so he got rid of the very instruments that he would have made a living with had he not gone to follow this call from God, so that option wouldn't be on the table anymore. And that's what Elijah wanted to see. That's what God wanted to see. They knew this was the right one. It's through this one and the commitment that he's making that we can now speak to the people the way we need to. Elijah can take him and work with him and train him and equip him so that he can do the job that needs to be done. You see, it wasn't about his ability already as a prophet that made the difference. It was about his willingness to be available, to be used. Not ability, availability. Willingness to give himself to it. And a lot of us look at our lives and we are looking over here in the ability column and thinking God can't really use me. But what God's looking for is not that column. What column is he looking at? The availability column. Will you make yourself available? That's all I need. I can train you. I can equip you. I can provide you what you need. I just need you to be available to be used. That's what I need. And Elisha's saying, not only am I going to make myself available now, I'm going to commit my whole life, give it over to be available to you forever. I'm going to burn the boats. In this case, the oxen and the plows. And I'm going to go all in the role you've called me to. So in light of that exchange, I want to talk about 4 C's here in this calling that Elisha has from God. 4 C's in his response of going all in. We've already talked about some of these a little bit already, but we need to be reminded of them, and I want to come back to a couple of them again to reinforce the concept in our minds. The first C is calling, okay? Elijah had a calling first, right? He was called to be a prophet. And then Elisha, this is his calling that we just read about, where he takes the cloak and he puts it over his shoulders. That was Elisha's calling, officially making it official. God's calling you to do this. Yesterday morning, I came to the men's breakfast, and I was the speaker for the time together with the guys. And one of the things I talked about was this misconception we have in the church today when it comes to calling. In the church today, we use the terminology. I get asked this all the time when people find out I'm a pastor. When did you know you were called to that? Right? I get asked that question a lot. And I can tell you there was no exact moment where just all of a sudden, bam, I knew I was called to do that. It wasn't like that for me. It was a gradual thing over time that called me into that. But the danger is we think of calling only in the light of somebody being called to be a pastor or a preacher or something like that. We think of that as they're the called ones. And we forget that under the new covenant, all of us are called. All of us are called. You have a calling from God. And I have a calling. Now, my role might be different than yours, but it doesn't make yours any less a calling from God. You have a calling from God too. And we know that for sure in Scripture because that is the exact terminology that is used in the New Testament for followers of Jesus Christ, that we all have a calling from God. Let's look at a couple of examples. Romans 8:28. We all know that verse, right? All things work together for what? For the good. But that's not all it says, all right? We know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been, what's that word? Called according to His purpose. All things work together for the good of what people? The called people. The called people. Who does that include? Everybody that's called of God to come follow Jesus. If you're here today and you've committed to be a follower of Jesus, it's because you were called by God. God called you in Christ to come be a disciple, a follower of Jesus Christ. You have a calling from God. And that calling can be lived out a lot of ways. But here is what he says. You've been called according to His purpose. It's according to His plan and purpose that now He's called you to live as a Christ follower and use you in this world in the way He predetermined that He wanted to use you in this world. He's given you gifts and abilities and experiences that are unique to you that He can use for His plan and purpose. The Bible said he prepared in advance good work that he wanted to do through you while you're here. That's a calling. It is a holy calling. And you can live it out as a teacher. You can live it out as an administrator. You can live it out as a politician. You can live it out as an athlete. You can live it out in all these different roles, whatever role you have. It's not the job. It's what you do at the job and with the job that makes it a fulfillment of God's call. Okay? You take a teacher in the classroom that understands they're called of God, then their teaching takes on a whole other aspect, doesn't it? They're not there just to teach information, are they? They're there to represent God in that classroom because God called them to that. You might be working in a totally pagan environment at work, totally non-Christian environment. And you think, why in the world would God put me here? I don't fit here. I don't belong here. They don't believe what I believe. They don't have the same values I do. Well, maybe you were called to be light in a dark place. Have you thought of that? Maybe he thought he could trust you in that environment to be faithful and strong and true and representing him in that environment. Because if any environment needs light, it's the dark place, right? It's the dark place. I love, Charles was doing the eulogy for his sister yesterday, and she struggled when she had to go to a care home, a care center. You know, she'd always done good work out there helping people in the community and all that. And then she found herself not able to do that anymore. She was in a nursing home and wondered what in the world, why would she be in a nursing home? She didn't want to be there. And Charles shared something that I thought was amazing. She finally understood that God could use her there too. And she ended up ministering to the workers in that nursing home and making a huge difference in their lives while she was there. It was a calling. You have to see your life and the call God has on you. That no matter where you are, what circumstance, what situation in life you're in, God's called you to be his person in that place at that time. You have a calling. In Ephesians 4:1, it says this, Paul was saying, as a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Did you catch that? Live a life worthy of the calling. He's not writing to the other apostles. He's writing to the church. And the church is who? It's the people. It's us. He's telling us, live a life worthy of the calling you, the church, have received. The church represents Jesus Christ on the earth. There's no higher calling than that. We need to live up to the calling that we have received. We're not going to be perfect at it. But to not even recognize it and make the effort is a sin. To not even understand it and try to do what God's called us to do, that's a sin. We've got to be willing to make the effort to live a life worthy of this high and holy calling we have from him. I need to fulfill it as a pastor-teacher. That's part of what he called me to. But you need to fulfill it in whatever role you're in. God has called you to. Live a life worthy of that calling that you've received from him. So the first C is calling. The second C is, we've talked about a little bit already, consecration. Consecration is a setting apart for God's holy purposes. Okay? Now, people were consecrated in the Old Testament, but also things were consecrated in the Old Testament. When they were going to use instruments in the temple worship or in the tabernacle, those things that they would use, like to burn the incense or to the altar that they would use to burn the sacrifices of meat, all those things, they consecrated those things to God too. Part of it would be a ceremony where they would be sprinkled with the blood of the sacrifice that was made. They would set those things apart as a high and holy thing given over to God. They were consecrated for God's use. They weren't supposed to be used for anything else except for God. And what Elisha is doing is saying, God, I understand what you're saying here. When Elijah put that cloak on me, he was saying, God was saying to him, your life now is supposed to be consecrated, set apart, only to be used for God. God's glory, God's honor, God's purposes. Remember, we have a calling. Our calling is to live a life worthy of the calling we received, right, from God. That means our lives are supposed to be consecrated, set apart then, to only be lived for Him. We don't live for, people say all the time, it's my life, I'll do what I want to with it. Not if you're a Christ follower. If you're a Christ follower, it's not your life. It's been purchased now by a high price. The blood of Jesus has been paid. God owns that life now. It is set apart for Him now. It is consecrated to Him. I love how Peter describes it in 1 Peter 2 and verse 9. He says this to Christians, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of Him who," here's that word again, "called you out of darkness into His wonderful light." We're supposed to be set apart as a special people for God. The problem is, we don't always set apart our lives and make it any different than anybody else's way of living. There is no distinction. There is no setting apart. That's what consecration is supposed to be. A distinction, a setting apart for God. We're not living for ourselves anymore. We're not even living for our families anymore. It's the top priority. We're not living for the world. We're not living for the stuff of the world. Our lives have been given to God now. We're living for Him. We're consecrated. We're set apart for Him. So our choices can't be just whatever we want, whenever we want. We can't just follow the inclinations of the flesh anymore because it doesn't belong to us anymore. It's been purchased. It belongs to Him. So the way it's used now is supposed to be only being used for Him, not for us anymore. So what we do with our body, what we do with our minds, what we do with our time, what we do with our talents, it all changes. It's no longer being done for us. It's being done for Him because it's been consecrated. It's been set apart for Him. There was always a cleansing ceremony with consecration and a setting apart ceremony. You know what it is for us as Christians in the New Testament? It's baptism. You're buried, and it says you're washed clean and made new, and you rise up to a new life. Now that life is given to Him. It belongs to Him. It says you're buried with Christ, and you're raised with Christ, right? So now you're covered with Christ. You belong to Christ. The price has been paid, and you belong to Him. It's a setting apart, a consecration. Therefore, he says in James 1:21, "Get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can now save you." So he says there needs to be a change. Consecration is a change that takes place. It's no longer your life to do with what you want. Now it belongs to Him. It's to be lived the way He wants it to be lived. There's a change, a total transformation of life and how you approach life with consecration. So there's a calling and there's a consecration, which leads to that third thing I just talked about. Number 3, the third C is change. The change needs to come with the calling and the consecration. The change needs to take place. I love how Elisha's life changed. Farming is an honorable job, isn't it? It's an honorable occupation. It's a good thing. There's nothing bad about really being a good farmer. That's a good thing. And we need more in the world today who will do that and commit to that. It's a good thing. But Elisha was called to go from farming to something different. There was going to be a change now in what he was doing with his life. He wasn't going to be a farmer anymore. Now he was going to be a prophet of God. And as a prophet of God, everything was going to change for him. He wasn't going to stay at the home place anymore. He wasn't going to live the rest of his life out there like he had thought probably when he was growing up. He would always be a farmer. He would live on the farm. He would die on the farm. That was going to be his life. It's all changed now. Now he's off on mission for God. And near the end of Elijah's life, Elijah knows the time is very close now. He's about to die. And Elisha's going to be the one on his own now. There's another encounter that I wanted us to look at in 2 Kings 2 and verse 9. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I'm taken from you." So Elijah knows he's about to leave. He wants Elisha to be ready. So he says, "Is there anything else, Elisha, that I can do for you, that I need to help you with before I go? Because he knew he was going to be taken by God. He knew that. And he wasn't going to be around anymore. And I love what Elisha asked for. He said, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elisha replied. What does that say about Elijah's example for Elisha? He's been impressed with Elijah, hasn't he? He's seen amazing things. He has been able to witness what a prophet was supposed to be in the life of his mentor, Elijah. I just pray we can be that for the people coming behind us, don't you? And Elisha says, "Oh, the greatest thing you could do for me, Elijah, is leave me a double portion of your spirit. I want to be like you double." That'd be great, wouldn't it? Be like you times 2, like you squared, right? I want to be like you, Elijah. Elijah says, "Well, that's a big thing you're asking for, and I can't say for sure, because who was the one ultimately who could do that? It wasn't Elijah. Who's the only one that could really do that? It's God, right? It was God who could do that, not Elijah." But Elijah kind of gives an answer, well, it's kind of up to God here if that happens. But I'm sure he was honored that that's what he asked for. And I didn't know this. When I was studying this, I was reading from a scholar who had written about this encounter here, and I found this intriguing. He said, here's something a lot of people don't catch. When you read about Elijah's life as a prophet, there are 6 great miracles that occurred while Elijah was reigning as prophet that God did through Elijah. And you might know some of them, you know, the mountainside with the prophets of Baal and the fire coming from heaven and all that. That was one. There were 6 great miracles that happened in the life of Elijah reigning as prophet during his lifetime. And he said, I studied that, and I looked at the life of Elisha, and he asked for what? A double portion, right? So 6 plus 6 is what? It's 12. Pretty cool. Except that when you read about the life of Elisha, he said, I could only find 11 big miracles that happened during the lifetime of Elisha that God did through him. So 6 and 6 is 12. He only hit 11, right? So he said, but then I looked a little further, and I found the 12th one. Look at 2 Kings 13, verse 21. Once while some Israelites were burying a man, this is long after Elisha has died, suddenly they saw a band of raiders. They threw the man's body into whose tomb? Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. Number 12. Even after he died, he got one more. Great miracle that God did through him. Friends, get this. If we will be fully devoted, consecrated people to the call that God has on our life, God can use us while we're here. And he can use us after we're dead and gone. The legacy can go on. The impact can continue for generations and generations. Don't miss the opportunity to impact this world for eternity by going all in right now. You see, if you don't go all in, you don't have the impact. You miss it. You don't have the opportunity. God doesn't have the opportunity to impact the world through you that he wanted to have. If you're not willing to go all in, if you hold anything back, you miss it. Don't miss it. Be willing to go all in. And that leads to the last C. The 4th one is this: choices. Choices. Elisha had a couple of prominent times he had to make this choice, that he was going to let God use him. He was going to be all in. The first one was when Elijah put the cloak around him while he was plowing, right? He had to choose, am I going to take it and go with it? Am I going to follow? Later on, remember when he asked Elijah for a double portion? Right after that, Elijah is taken up. Elijah knew he was about to leave this world. He was taken up in a chariot of fire. He didn't even have to face death the normal way. He was just taken by God, right? It's a great story. You should go back and look at it. But you know what happened when he was taken up? The cloak that he was wearing was left on the ground, at the spot where he was taken up. And Elisha had to choose again. Will I take up the cloak? God was saying, I'm not going to force you to keep on. It's up to you. Will you still be all in for me? And we know that he took the cloak and he put it on. He had to make the choice. And as our praise team comes up today, friends, in this series, that's what we have to see. We all have the same choice to make. The cloak is laid out. The offer has been given to all of us. The call has been issued for us to go all in for him. And we have to choose to either accept or reject the call. Will we take the cloak? Will we respond positively to the call that God is issuing to us? You know the famous account in Joshua 24 and verse 15. Joshua is challenging the people to choose who they're going to serve. He says, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are now living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. The amazing thing is God even gives us a choice at all, isn't it? Because we've all sinned and the wages of sin is death. We don't even have any right to a choice. But by his grace, he calls us to accept forgiveness. He calls us to cleansing through the blood of Jesus, and he calls us to the choice to follow him. What about you and your household? What choice do you make? As we stand and sing, we invite you to come to him.